Kyiv has agreed to provide Gulf countries with its complete air defense system, including maritime drones, electronic warfare, and interception technology against Iranian drones. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky unveiled what he called historic agreement on his way back from his visit of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Jordan.
Ми домовляємось про стратегічне, домовились про стратегічне співробітництво в напрямку Мілтек і в інших напрямках. Ми говоримо про десятирічні договори.
Zelensky added that Ukraine is willing to share its expertise in unblocking maritime trade routes with naval drones. In 2022, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, signed by Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, and the UN, unblocked the export of grain from Ukrainian ports.
Ми ділилися досвідом Чорноморського коридору, як він функціонує. Вони розуміють, що це дуже продуктивно вийшло у наших збройних сил розблокувати Чорноморський коридор. Ми ділимося цими деталями.
The deals with the Gulf countries are an opportunity for Kyiv to open its arms exports on a global scale.
Until Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the consensus in Finland was that it wasn't necessary to join NATO. Since the Second World War, when Finland was temporarily occupied by Russia, the country developed and maintained the highest level of defence protection through public vigilance and deterrence, with a well-funded military which has conscription for young men for at least 1 year's mandatory service. Even throughout the peaceful post-Soviet era, Finland never let its guard down. Now, in this moment of untold volatility, Europe is hoping to learn from Finnish preparedness.
Finnish border guards have to be prepared for any low-level incident, but also including a full-scale invasion. This is Finnish territory, but also NATO territory. Also, not too far away from here is Russia's nuclear deterrence.
It's part of defence system of Finland, so we prepared also to part of Finnish territorial defence.
And what does that mean?
For example, we train our conscripts for our reserve, which is a useful tool if necessary on the wartime.
So basically a full-scale invasion?
Yeah, that's correct.
On the Russian border, conscripts are trained for the wide gamut of roles in the army, including sniper or marksman.
I've never held a rifle in my life, so first time shooting was in the army. You start off with the basic assault rifle, and I found out in the army that I have a gift for shooting. So that's how I got into this marksman.
Russian aggression in Ukraine has had dire consequences for the indigenous Sami people who are native to Russia, Finland and Norway. Finland's Sami people have had to cut ties from their Russian brethren, many of whom were forced into the Russian army to attack Ukraine.
One of the terrible things is that some of the Sami brothers on the Russian side have been forcibly conscripted to the Russian army and sent to the war front in Ukraine. And we have also lost at least, I think, 7 Sami young men. And it's a huge loss in a small community, about 2,000.
Europe now acknowledges the transatlantic alliance is not as viable as it once was. The US is now calling for Europe to help its war efforts in Iran, or risk them pulling completely away from helping Ukraine with military intelligence as it defends itself from Russia.
Ukraine is not a bargaining chip. As I said, a shift of attention also from the US would be a huge mistake. But what we have to do is to continue to convince the US that they have to be engaged to help Ukraine, and we have to do our job also to reinforce our support to Ukraine from the military, financial perspective.
Finland's border guard stretches 1,350 kilometres with Russia, the largest inside NATO, but the Finns say they're ready for anything. Shona Murray, Euronews, Giuseppe, Finland.
Israel's parliament has passed a law approving the death penalty for Palestinians convicted on terror charges for deadly attacks, a measure that has been harshly condemned by the international community and rights groups as discriminatory and inhumane. The law, championed by far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, makes the death penalty by hanging the default punishment for West Bank Palestinians convicted for nationalistic killings. Legal experts say this language effectively confines those who can be sentenced to death to Palestinian citizens of Israel and excludes Jewish citizens.
מהיום ידע כל מחבל וידע העולם כולו מי שנוטל חיים מדינת ישראל תיטול את חייו. הצדק הזה צריך להיראות ולהיעשות וממחר בבוקר בעזרת השם יתברך הוא יעשה.
Minutes after the bill passed, the Association of Civil Rights in Israel said it had already petitioned Israel's highest court to challenge the law, calling it discriminatory by design. The foreign ministers of Australia, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy released a statement on Sunday urging Israel to abandon plans to pass the law, calling it de facto discriminatory, and saying the death penalty was unethical and had no deterring effect. The Council of Europe said the adoption of the law represents a serious regression. The UN Security Council is set to convene an emergency meeting after 3 UN peacekeepers were killed in southern Lebanon in 24 hours. The UN interim force in Lebanon said 2 of its personnel were killed Monday in an explosion, and another died late Sunday when a projectile hit their position. It said it launched an investigation into the separate incidents. Israel's military said on Tuesday it was investigating the 2 incidents to determine whether they resulted from Hezbollah or from IDF activity.
Attacks on peacekeepers, as we've been saying quite a bit, is a grave violation of international humanitarian law and of Security Council Resolution 1701 and may amount to war crimes. There will need to be accountability.
The incidents come as fighting between Hezbollah militants and Israeli forces intensifies amid an Israeli invasion into Lebanese border areas. The UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon said on Monday that the humanitarian impact in southern Lebanon has reached devastating levels. The envoy detailed that the 3 UN peacekeepers and 9 Lebanese paramedics killed in just the last few days are part of a broader death toll that now stands at more than 1,240, while more than 1 million people remain displaced.
Spain has banned U.S. military aircraft involved in the Iran war from using its airspace and military bases. The ban extends an earlier restriction that applied only to 2 American installations on Spanish soil and now covers the entire country.
España no va a autorizar en ningún caso, ni lo ha hecho, ni lo hace, ni lo hará, la utilización de las bases de Rota y Morón para ir a una guerra contra la que estamos totalmente en contra, en la que no creemos, que nos parece profundamente ilegal y profundamente injusta.
The restrictions have been communicated to U.S. forces from the outset and are not a sudden policy shift, she stressed. Foreign Minister José Manuel Alvarez added Madrid would block any U.S. flights linked to the conflict from entering Spanish airspace. The U.S. did not immediately comment, but U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened earlier this month to cut off all trade with Spain over its refusal to allow the bases to be used for Iran operations. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has taken a stance against the war in Iran, led by the United States and Israel, calling it an extraordinary mistake.
Kosovo is bearing the brunt of the economic crisis triggered by the war in Iran. For this country, one of the poorest in Europe, rising fuel prices are having an immediate impact on businesses. In the agricultural sector, for example, price volatility is proving particularly challenging.
Me fillimin e luftës në Iran, ajo çka kemi afektuar automatikisht ne është çmimi I derivateve në treg. Ne jemi tash në sezonin e mbjelljeve të patatës, sikur shihet këtu, domethënë çmimi është rrit ngjeshëm. Për €1.10 mesatërisht ka qenë ka shkuar deri në €1.70, është kosto jashtëzakonisht I lartë. Në këtë rast, kjo rritje e kostos ka më ndikuar direkt edhe në kostot përcjellëse deri te finalizimi I prodhimit.
Whilst Kosovo's neighboring countries have introduced support measures to limit the effect of rising fuel prices, the Kosovo government has still not taken action. However, according to economic experts, the authorities must act swiftly to prevent further damage. The economic difficulties are exacerbated by the political difficulties in Kosovo. The Prime Minister is in a political deadlock, and the opposition is condemning what it calls his government's inaction.
22 people have gone on trial in France on charges of murder and other serious crimes, centred on members of a Masonic lodge accused of running hit squads. Those in the dock include 4 military personnel from France's Foreign Intelligence Service, 2 police officers, a retired domestic intelligence officer, a security guard and 2 business executives. One victim, who survived 2 assassination attempts, explains the consequences of the attacks.
Trouble du stress post-traumatique dont je n'arrive pas à sortir en fait depuis 6 ans, ça revient par épisode. Cancer et puis exclusion de ma profession également. Voilà, ça fait quand même beaucoup de choses.
Most of the accused, aged between 30 and 73, have no previous criminal records. They are accused of murder, attempted murders, aggravated assault and criminal conspiracy, all on behalf of a mafia network inside the former Athener Masonic Lodge in a Paris suburb.